Hi, it's Lisa. So today's video is about using beef heart. So we get freezer meat every year. We get a whole cow, and then sometimes we get more. We get like a half cow later on in the year. And we get the organ meats with it. We get the liver, the heart, the tongue, because organ meats are nutrient dense, and we're already paying for the hanging weight of the cow, so it's, better to get as much as you can. We get all the bones for soup and stock and stuff. So anyway, I thought I'd show you how we like to prepare, or one way we like to prepare beef heart. This is a whole beef heart. It's huge. Sometimes the processor will cut it, so you'll get like 2 packages of smaller heart. So the last time I made heart stew, it was a smaller chunk of heart. Doesn't really matter. The processor another processor we've used does where they slice it, and so you get packages of it like sliced. Doesn't really matter. However you've got it, you can use it the same. You can do other things with it than what I'm doing today, but we're going to have beef heart stew for dinner. And the first time I ever made this, my kids were like, ew, that sounds disgusting. And then I said, it tastes like beef stew. It smells like beef stew. Try it. If you don't like it, you can have something else. They all loved it. So now when they see it on the menu, they're like super happy. So anyway, I just thought it's something that most people aren't familiar with, and it would be a good thing to show you how to do. Now, the heart does have a lot of fat on it, and it has a lot of like tendons and arteries and icky bits is what I call them, and you need to trim those off. So what I usually do is cut it into manageable pieces, and then I just start trimming it. We defrosted it, and it might still be a little bit frozen. It's hard. It's such a big hunk of meat, and it was folded in half in the package. So anyway, the other side of it looks like this. It's a bright red meat, obviously, and it has the same taste as far as I'm concerned as any other beef, but I'm just going to get rid of that, so my garbage is going to go in there. It's a little bit of a chewier texture, but not so much so that it's a huge noticeable thing. Like, it works great in a braised stew because it helps tenderize it. But other than that, it tastes pretty much the same as beef, just slightly different texture. But I'm going to try and cut through all this fat on the edges. And then what I do is I just cut into chunks, and I just put them in my stock pot, in my pot that I'm using to make the stew, and then I'm just going to throw the stew and all the ingredients in and just put it in the oven. You can, if you want. Last time what I did was I put the meat in a separate bowl and I browned it before I did the stew, but in the interest of saving time today, because we have a lot going on, I am just going to put it right in the stew pot and then put everything else in it and just shove it in the oven. I'm not going to brown anything. I don't think it makes that much of a flavor bomb difference. So I'm going to see if I can trim up some of this out of this fat casing. And obviously you don't have to get every little bit of fat off, because the fat will give it some flavor. You just don't want these big thick parts of fat, or you'll have much more kind of what I call gamier taste. So I've just got like a little piece of meat. I'm just going to put it in the pot. And all this icky bit is going in the garbage. What we usually do, it's cold in Michigan currently, February. But if it were summer, I would put all the parts in a bag of some sort and tie it up and stick it in my deep freeze, and then on garbage day take it out of the freezer, so that it's not getting rancid in the heat of summer in the garbage can. But since it's cold outside and it's going to be at freezing or below the next week, I can just throw this right in the trash, and it'll go out on trash day in a few days. So basically, all I'm doing is cutting this into bite-sized pieces and putting it in the pot. And I mean, I won't get every little scrap of meat. I'll have this on there. So I'm just going to keep cutting chunks and trimming it up. That's all there is to it. But it's an economical way to stretch your dollar, to do your meal and stretch your dollar, because first of all, if you can buy this from some local farms, like separately, even if you're not getting a whole cow. Usually they'll have some of the organ meats for sale, or you can request them and they'll get them when they take a cow in for processing. And it's usually much more economical than like stew meat or other highly sought after cuts. And it does take a little bit more prep work, but it's super nutrient dense. And we just picked up our whole cow today. So this was in the freezer from before, and we needed to use it up to get it out of there. So that's why we decided to do this today. And then you get nice big chunks of meat, and you can just cut those up. And the reason it's a little tougher than normal is it, you know, it's probably the most used muscle in the body, being the heart. And so a good way to make it is anything that's braised. A soup, a stew. You could even slice it and braise it, or you could pound it real thin and marinate it and probably help break down some of the connective tissue. I happened to get this recipe years ago from someone in my local Weston A. Price chapter, and I've made it. It's very good, so we tend to just use that because you only get 1 heart per cow. So, but one of these days, maybe I'll find another recipe to try if I come across another opportunity to get a heart. I'm going to load this stew with lots of veggies and some homemade bone broth that we canned, and probably a dash of wine and some tomato paste and a bunch of spices. So I will show you how I do all that too. So the outside like fatty layer and the like membrane is real tough, which is why I tend to cut that right off along the edge. You can kind of feel the difference too, like the outside parts feel real like kind of leathery, and the meat itself is nice and soft. So you can kind of tell if it's a bit you want or don't want. I'm using a pretty sharp boning knife. Makes it easier, I find. Yeah. Alright, I'm gonna go chop up my veggies and get ready to make the stew, and I'll come back. Okay, so I'm gonna cook this. I'm not really browning the meat. If I was gonna do that, I would put oil in the pan and put it in batches. But I wanna throw some flour on the meat and cook the flour off a bit, because that'll help thicken my stew. So, and I don't really measure, I'm just kind of looking based on how much meat and how much liquid I know will be in there. Gotta turn this on. Gotta turn the burner on. There we go. Alright. So now I'm just gonna stir this in here. Let the flour kind of cook out the raw flour taste. And ideally my pan would have been hot, but I forgot to preheat it, sorry. Okay, so we'll let this go for a couple minutes while I grab some salt and some pepper. I'm gonna put a little bit of salt in here. I'm gonna put like basically like a teaspoon and a half, because my beef broth I'm using is homemade, and we don't put a ton of salt in it. We put some, but it's not like what I would call salty. It would be very low sodium basically, so I add a little bit more salt to my stew. If you're using store-bought bone broth, you might not need as much salt. And I'm just doing some pepper. And I just use whatever spices float my boat at the moment. So I just pulled out some things from my cupboard. Mix everything in. The flour will stick a bit, but when I put some liquid in there, it'll be fine. Alright, so I'm going to put a dash of rosemary. I don't love rosemary, so I don't put very much. I love thyme, so I do mostly thyme. A little bit of basil. Well, apparently I have 2 jars that say rosemary, but this is marjoram. Or is this? It smells like rosemary, doesn't it? Well, somehow somebody took my marjoram jar and put rosemary in it, so I guess we're not having marjoram. And I've got some paprika. I like paprika, it gives it a nice rich color, and I like the flavor of paprika. Alright. So I'm going to stir that in for a minute. And then I'm going to put my garlic in. Got 2 cloves of homegrown garlic. They were pretty big cloves. And I did peel my garlic ahead of time, so I'm just going to dig whatever didn't go through out. I've got another half because that clove was so big to fit in here. See if I can get it in there. And because it's February, my garlic is starting to get a little bit of green sprouting going on. I'm going to have to take some of it and freeze it in ice cubes with olive oil or refrigerate it. Okay. Alright. Give that a tiny stir. And kind of cook some of that raw garlic flavor out of there. Then I'm going to add some tomato paste. I've got a partial dart here I used for something else, so I'm just going to use the rest of it. Probably a couple tablespoons worth. Now we'll cook some of that raw tomato out of there. And I'm going to glaze the pan with a little bit of red wine. This is just basically the recipe I use when I make any beef stew. I just happen to be using heart meat. Got a 1/4 cup of wine. Maybe a splash more. There we go. And unfortunately, this pan is really old. It's been through the wringer, and the glaze on the inside of the enamel has gotten kind of destroyed, so stuff sticks to it. Alright, I'm going to add, I've got an open jar that was in the fridge, which is a couple cups of beef broth. And I've got a full can of beef broth. Alright, I'm just gonna let this get a little bit warmer, And then I'm gonna throw my vegetables in and a couple of bay leaves and then throw it in the oven to cook. All right. I'm gonna put a bag of corn we froze in the summer from a local organic farm. Bought some, cut it off the cob and froze it. So I'm gonna throw that in here. It's still frozen, which is fine. It'll heat through in the oven. Just to get it out of our freezer and use it up. So I've got some corn, and then I've got potatoes, a white sweet potato, some carrots, onions, and celery in here. I'm just gonna stir these all in. I'm not worried about the corn being frozen because it will be fine by the end. Just make sure this is all. Okay, I'm gonna throw a couple bay leaves in. And we should be good to go. I'm gonna let it cook for probably an hour and a half in the oven, and I'll let you see it when it comes out. I wanted to touch on the nutrient-dense profile of beef heart because I mentioned it in the beginning that it's nutrient-dense. Beef heart is extremely high in protein. It has all of the essential amino acids to make a complete protein. It is high in lactin and collagen. It has like double the amount as in other cuts of grass-fed beef. It has zinc, selenium, phosphorus, highly concentrated source of CoQ10, contains B vitamins 2, 6, and 12, lycopene, iron, and potassium. Approximately a 3 ounce serving is approximately 24.2 grams of protein, 68% of your recommended daily value of iron, 48% of your recommended daily value of selenium, 61% of the recommended daily value of B2 riboflavin, and 383% of the recommended daily value of vitamin B12. It also contains newly discovered peptides, one called DWORF, which is newly discovered. Anyway, so it's very nutrient dense, which is why it's a good thing to add into your diet. And it tastes really good. Our stew was delicious.